The snow fell thick and heavy over Missoula, Montana on the night of March 15, 2003. It was the kind of late winter storm that locals knew well. Wet, dense flakes that clung to everything they touched, muffling the world in white silence. By 11 o'clock, the streets of downtown were nearly empty, the neon signs of bars and restaurants casting colored halos through the curtain of falling snow. Inside the Eastgate Lounge on East Broadway, 26-year-old Rita Mays was wiping down the bar for the last time that night. Her movements practiced and efficient. The jukebox had gone quiet an hour ago. The last customers had stumbled out into the storm around 10:30, leaving behind empty beer bottles and crumpled bills on the scratched wooden tables. Rita moved through the familiar closing routine, counting the register, stacking chairs, checking that the back door was locked. A silver Honda Accord sat in the employee parking lot behind the building, already buried under 3 inches of fresh powder. She pulled her faded denim jacket tighter against the cold that seeped through the walls. In less than an hour, she would be gone. No one would see her leave. Rita Lynn Mays had the kind of beauty that didn't demand attention, but somehow always received it anyway. At 5'6", with shoulder-length auburn hair and green eyes that crinkled when she smiled, she moved through the world with an easy confidence that put people at ease. She'd been working at the Eastgate Lounge for nearly 3 years, long enough that she knew most of the regulars by name, knew their drink orders before they sat down, knew which ones needed a sympathetic ear and which ones just needed to be cut off and sent home. Her co-workers described her as reliable. She never missed a shift, never showed up late, never complained about working weekends or closing shifts. Her manager, Dennis Coelho, trusted her completely. She was one of only 3 bartenders who had their own set of keys to the building. Born and raised in Great Falls, Montana, Rita had moved to Missoula 5 years earlier, drawn by the college town's energy and the promise of something more than the small-town life she'd known growing up. She'd taken classes at the University of Montana for 2 semesters, thinking about becoming a teacher, but financial pressures had forced her to drop out and focus on work. She'd cycled through several jobs, waitressing at a truck stop, clerking at a convenience store, answering phones at a veterinary clinic, before landing the bartending gig at the Eastgate. The money was decent, the tips were good on weekends, and she'd developed a real knack for the work. She could mix drinks quickly, diffuse angry drunks with humor, and somehow managed to remember the complicated life stories of dozens of customers who treated her as part confidant, part therapist. Rita lived alone in a small studio apartment on South 4th Street West, a modest building with thin walls and temperamental heating. Her space was neat and carefully decorated, thrift store furniture that she'd refinished herself, plants in the windows, photographs of her family taped to the refrigerator. She spoke to her mother in Great Falls every Sunday afternoon without fail, their conversations lasting sometimes an hour or more. She had an older brother, Michael, who worked in construction in Billings, and a younger sister, Sarah, who was finishing high school. Her father had died of cancer when Rita was 16, a loss that had left deep marks on the entire family. In her free time, Rita liked to hike. Missoula was surrounded by mountains and trails, and she'd spent countless summer days exploring them. She'd recently started dating someone, a carpenter named Travis McKenzie, though their relationship was still new, still in that uncertain stage where neither person was quite sure where things were headed. She drove a 1995 silver Honda Accord with a dent in the rear passenger door from a minor fender bender the previous year. The car was reliable, if not beautiful, and she took care of it. Regular oil changes, new tires when needed, an air freshener shaped like a pine tree hanging from the rearview mirror. She kept her registration and insurance card in the glove box, along with a flashlight, a pack of wintergreen gum, and a dog-eared paperback novel she'd been reading during her lunch breaks. Her purse was a brown leather shoulder bag, worn soft from years of use, containing her wallet, her apartment keys, a tube of chapstick, some loose change, and a photograph of her family taken at Christmas 2 years earlier. She'd received her last paycheck, that Friday, $487.63 after taxes, and had deposited it at the Wells Fargo on Higgins Avenue during her afternoon break. She'd planned to use some of it to buy her mother a birthday present. Her mother would turn 58 on March 23rd, just 8 days away. at 11:47 p.m. on March 15, 2003. Rita Mays locked the front door of the Eastgate Lounge from the inside. She'd already shut off most of the lights, leaving just the security lights near the exits and the dim glow from the beer signs behind the bar. The register had been counted and the money placed in the safe in Dennis's office. The floors were swept. The glasses were washed and stacked. Everything was in order. Security footage from the camera mounted above the cash register showed her moving behind the bar, her movements unhurried. She wore her usual work uniform, black jeans, black t-shirt with the bar's logo, white sneakers. Over this, she'd pulled on her denim jacket. She grabbed her purse from the shelf beneath the register and slung it over her shoulder. At 11:51 p.m., she walked toward the back of the building, disappearing from the camera's view. The back door led to the employee parking lot. The camera didn't cover that area. She was supposed to lock the back door from the outside and walk to her car. But when Dennis Coelho arrived at the Eastgate Lounge at 9:30 a.m. the next morning, Saturday, March the 16th, he found something that made his stomach drop. The back door was standing open. Not wide open, but ajar, maybe 6 inches, enough that anyone passing by would notice. Snow had blown into the back hallway, creating a small drift just inside the threshold. Rita's car was still in the parking lot, its windshield covered in snow, its hood cold to the touch. Inside the bar, everything appeared normal. The safe was locked, the cash was secure, nothing seemed disturbed or stolen. But Rita was gone. Her purse was gone. Her keys were gone. And the back door, which should have been locked, stood open to the cold morning air. Dennis immediately called Rita's apartment. No answer. He called her cell phone. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He called Travis McKenzie, whose number Rita had given him as an emergency contact. Travis answered, groggy and confused. He hadn't seen Rita since Thursday evening. They'd had dinner at a pizza place on Higgins, and she'd mentioned working a closing shift on Friday, but said she'd call him on Saturday. She never called. Dennis stood in the cold parking lot, staring at Rita's snow-covered car, and made his next call. At 10:13 a.m., he dialed 911. Officer Mark Stevenson arrived at the Eastgate Lounge within 15 minutes, followed shortly by Detective Rachel Winters from the Missoula Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division. The scene they encountered was both ordinary and deeply unsettling. Rita's Honda Accord sat exactly where she'd parked it, locked, the interior visible through the windows. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing out of place. Her car registration was still in the glove box. Inside the bar, Winters walked through Rita's closing routine, retracing what should have been her last steps of the night. Everything suggested a normal closing, except for that open back door. The door itself showed no signs of forced entry. It had been unlocked from the inside using a key. There were no obvious fingerprints on the handle, other than smudge marks that could have belonged to anyone. Outside in the parking lot, the fresh snow had covered any tracks or tire marks that might have been left the night before. By noon, Rita's absence had been officially classified as a missing person case. Detective Winters contacted Rita's mother, Barbara Mays, in Great Falls. The conversation was brief and devastating. No, Barbara said. Rita hadn't called. No, she wouldn't just disappear without telling anyone. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. Barbara and Rita's brother Michael drove to Missoula that afternoon, arriving as darkness fell. Sarah, still 17, stayed behind with relatives. At the police station, Barbara provided photographs of Rita, a detailed description, information about any identifying marks. Rita had a small scar on her left knee from a childhood bicycle accident. She had her ears pierced twice in each lobe. She wore a silver ring on her right hand, a simple band that had belonged to her grandmother. No, Rita didn't use drugs. No, she didn't have enemies. No, she wasn't in financial trouble. No, she wouldn't just run away. The Missoula Police Department launched an immediate search. On Sunday, March 17th, more than 60 volunteers gathered at the Eastgate Lounge to fan out across the surrounding area. The weather had cleared, leaving behind bright sunshine and temperatures that barely crept above freezing. Search teams worked in grid patterns, covering streets, alleys, parking lots, vacant buildings, anywhere a person might be. K9 units were brought in, tracking dogs given Rita's scent from clothing in her apartment. The dog showed interest in the area around the Eastgate's back door, but then seemed to lose the trail. A helicopter from the Montana Highway Patrol flew over the area, equipped with thermal imaging cameras. Nothing. Search volunteers checked dumpsters, abandoned vehicles, the riverbanks along the Clark Fork River. They found nothing. No clothing, no purse, no identification, no sign of Rita Mays. Detective Winters began the painstaking process of reconstructing Rita's final hours. The security footage from inside the bar showed her last movements: serving drinks, wiping tables, counting the register, locking the front door. The timestamp on the last frame showed her walking toward the back at 11:51 p.m. Winters interviewed every customer who'd been in the bar that night. Most were regulars, people whose names Dennis knew. They gave statements, provided alibis, expressed shock and concern. Yes, Rita had seemed normal. No, she hadn't mentioned any problems. No, they hadn't noticed anyone suspicious. One customer, Gary Holland, had been the last to leave. Around 10:35 p.m. He'd had 3 beers and Rita had called him a cab. He'd paid his tab, left a $5 tip, and walked out the front door. The cab driver confirmed picking Holland up and taking him home. Winters also spoke with Travis McKenzie. He was forthcoming, cooperative, visibly shaken. He and Rita had been dating for about 6 weeks. Things were going well. They'd talked about taking a trip to Glacier National Park once the weather warmed up. He'd been home alone the night Rita disappeared. No alibi, but no motive either. Their relationship was new, but stable. He had no criminal record, no history of violence. He volunteered to take a polygraph test. He passed. Winters interviewed Rita's co-workers, her landlord, her neighbors, anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. A neighbor in Rita's apartment building mentioned seeing her leave for work around 5:30 p.m. on March 15th, her usual time for a closing shift. She'd been wearing her work clothes and carrying her purse. She'd gotten into her Honda and driven away. That was the last confirmed sighting of Rita Mays by anyone who knew her. As the investigation widened, Winters discovered no red flags in Rita's life. Her bank records showed regular deposits from the Eastgate and regular small withdrawals for daily expenses. No large sums missing, no suspicious transactions. Her phone record showed calls to her mother, her boyfriend, a few friends. Nothing unusual. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Bed made, dishes washed, laundry folded in a basket. On her nightstand was a library book, due back on March 18th. In her refrigerator were groceries bought on Thursday: milk, eggs, sandwich meat, vegetables. On her calendar was a note reminding her of her mother's birthday. Everything pointed to a woman who'd expected to come home. The media descended on the story quickly. By Monday, March 18th, Rita's disappearance was front-page news in the Missoulian and the lead story on local television stations. Bartender vanishes after closing shift, read the headlines. Rita's photograph, a smiling snapshot from the previous summer, taken at a friend's barbecue, appeared everywhere. The police department set up a tip line. Calls poured in. Dozens, then hundreds. People reported seeing women who looked like Rita at gas stations, rest stops, truck stops across Montana. Every lead was checked. Every sighting was investigated. None panned out. Psychics called, claiming to have visions of where Rita could be found. One said she was in the river. Another said she was being held in a cabin in the mountains. Another said she'd run away to Seattle to start a new life. Search teams followed up on the tips that seemed even remotely credible. They found nothing. On March 23rd, Barbara Mays turned 58. She spent her birthday at the Missoula Police Department, speaking with reporters, pleading for information. "Rita is my daughter," she said, her voice breaking. "She's someone's sister, someone's friend. Someone out there knows what happened to her. Please help us bring her home." The press conference was televised across Montana. Tips increased, still nothing. The Mays family offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to Rita's whereabouts. Local businesses and community members contributed to the fund, raising it to $25,000 within a week. Posters with Rita's photograph went up on telephone poles, in storefront windows, at rest areas along Interstate 90. Missing, Rita Mays. Last seen March 15, 2003. Call with any information. Detective Winters continued working the case with the dedication of someone who took these things personally. She'd been a detective for 8 years, had worked dozens of missing person cases, but something about Rita's disappearance haunted her. The lack of evidence, the complete absence of any sign of struggle or violence, the open door. It all suggested something planned, something calculated. Winters theorized that Rita had either left with someone she knew or had been confronted by someone immediately after closing. The open door suggested she might have stepped outside briefly, maybe to talk to someone, maybe to help someone with something, and then something had gone wrong. But who? And where had they gone? Rita's car was still there, so they hadn't driven away in her vehicle. Had someone else's car been waiting in the parking lot? The snow had erased any tire tracks. Winters looked at every possibility. Had Rita been abducted by a stranger, a transient passing through Missoula? Had she been targeted by someone who knew her routine, knew she closed alone on Friday nights? Had she witnessed something, known something that made her a threat to someone? The Eastgate Lounge wasn't in a particularly dangerous area, but it wasn't far from the railroad tracks, not far from the interstate. Missoula, despite its college town atmosphere, had its share of crime. Property theft mostly, occasional assaults, drug activity. But stranger abductions were rare. Most violence against women was perpetrated by someone known to the victim. Winters returned to this fact again and again. Someone in Rita's life. But who? Travis had an alibi, weak but consistent. Dennis Coelho had been home with his wife. The customers had all been accounted for. Co-workers had their own alibis. So who? Spring came to Missoula, melting the snow, exposing the brown grass and the bare ground beneath. Search teams went out again, hoping the thaw might reveal something that winter had hidden. They searched along the riverbanks, in the gullies and ravines in the hills surrounding the city, in the forests north of town. They found nothing. Summer arrived, and with it came tourists and hikers and campers. If Rita's body was out there in the wilderness, surely someone would stumble upon it. But the mountains kept their secrets. Fall came and went. Winter returned. 1 year passed since Rita's disappearance. Barbara Mays held a memorial service at a church in Missoula on March 15, 2004, exactly 1 year after Rita had vanished. More than 200 people attended. Friends, co-workers, strangers who'd followed the case, who'd felt moved by the mystery and the tragedy of it. Rita's absence was a presence in itself, a weight that filled the room. Barbara lit a candle. She spoke about her daughter, about the girl who'd loved hiking and reading and making people laugh. "We won't stop looking," she said. "We won't give up hope." Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, months to years. By 2006, the case had gone cold. Detective Winters had been promoted and reassigned. The investigation was turned over to the Cold Case Unit, where it joined dozens of other unsolved disappearances and homicides. The reward money remained unclaimed. The posters faded in the sun and were eventually taken down or covered by newer flyers for other missing people, other tragedies. The Eastgate Lounge installed a memorial plaque near the bar in Rita's honor. A small brass plate with her name and dates. Rita Mays, 1976-2003. Always remembered. But as time passed, fewer people remembered. New bartenders were hired who'd never known Rita. New customers came who'd never heard her story. Life moved on, the way it always does, leaving behind only those who refused to forget. Barbara Mays never stopped fighting. She called the Missoula Police Department every month, asking for updates, asking if there was anything new. Usually there wasn't. She created a website dedicated to Rita's case, posting photographs, timeline information, contact details for law enforcement. She joined support groups for families of missing persons. She attended conferences on cold cases and victim advocacy. She learned about advances in forensic science, about DNA databases, about the ways that old cases could sometimes be solved with new technology. She never remarried after her husband's death. She devoted herself to finding Rita, to bringing her home, to learning what had happened that night in March 2003. Michael visited his mother often, worried about her health, her obsession with the case. Sarah, now grown, tried to balance honoring her sister's memory with building her own life. The Mays family existed in a state of suspended grief, unable to fully mourn because there was no body, no grave, no certain ending. In 2010, 7 years after Rita's disappearance, the Missoula Police Department received a call from a hiker who'd made a discovery in the Rattlesnake Wilderness area north of the city. The hiker had found human remains, bones scattered in a wooded area several miles from the nearest trail. The Missoula County Sheriff's Office responded, and the remains were carefully excavated and transported to the state crime lab. Forensic analysis determined the bones were female, aged approximately 25-30, and had been there for several years. Barbara Mays held her breath. Could this finally be Rita? DNA comparison took weeks. The results came back negative. The remains belonged to someone else, another victim, another family's tragedy. Barbara's hope crumbled. The waiting continued. For the next decade, Rita's case remained dormant. Detectives assigned to the cold case unit reviewed the file periodically, but with no new leads and no new evidence, there was little they could do. The physical evidence from the scene, photographs, the security footage, witness statements, had been carefully preserved, stored in boxes in the evidence room. Rita's Honda Accord had eventually been released to her family. Michael had driven it back to Great Falls, where it sat in Barbara's garage, untouched, a shrine to his missing sister. The original investigation had been thorough, professional, but ultimately fruitless. Without a body, without a crime scene, without a suspect, there was nowhere to go. The case file grew dusty. The digital files were backed up and archived. The investigation didn't close. It simply stopped moving forward. In 2019, 16 years after Rita's disappearance, the Missoula Police Department hired a new detective specifically for cold case investigations. His name was James Halloran, a veteran investigator who'd spent 23 years with the Billings Police Department before taking early retirement and then unretiring to take this position. Halloran was 54 years old, grey-haired, methodical, patient. He'd built a reputation in Billings for solving old cases, for applying new technologies and fresh perspectives to investigations that others had given up on. He brought with him an understanding that cold cases weren't really cold. They were just waiting for the right questions to be asked, the right connections to be made. Halloran began reviewing every unsolved case in the department's files, prioritizing those where physical evidence had been preserved. Rita Mays' case caught his attention immediately. A missing woman. No body ever found. No real suspects, but plenty of evidence. Witness statements, security footage, phone records, the scene itself. Halloran requested the complete case file and spent 3 weeks reading through every document, every interview, every report. He watched the security footage dozens of times, studying Rita's movements, looking for anything that previous investigators might have missed. He reviewed the witness statements, cross-referencing them against each other, looking for inconsistencies or overlooked details. He studied maps of Missoula, trying to understand the geography, the routes, the possibilities. One detail kept nagging at Halloran. In the original investigation, Detective Winters had interviewed everyone who'd been in the bar that night, but she'd focused primarily on customers. What about people who'd driven past? What about people who lived or worked nearby? What about people who might have been in the area but not inside the East Gate itself? Halloran obtained maps showing every business and residence within a quarter-mile radius of the bar. Many of those businesses had closed in the years since 2003. Many of the residents had moved away, but some were still there. Halloran decided to recanvass the area, something that hadn't been done in over 15 years. In October 2019, Halloran began knocking on doors. He spoke with the owner of an auto repair shop 2 blocks from the Eastgate. The man had owned the business since 1998 and remembered the night Rita disappeared. He'd seen the police presence the next morning, had heard about the missing bartender, but he'd never been interviewed in 2003. Had he seen anything unusual that night? He thought for a moment, reaching back through 16 years of accumulated memories. Maybe. He remembered seeing a truck parked behind the Eastgate that night. He'd been working late, doing paperwork in his office, and had stepped outside for a cigarette around 11:30 or so. He'd noticed the truck because it was parked in an odd spot, not in the marked spaces, but along the edge of the lot, near the back door. What kind of truck? He couldn't remember exactly. Older model, maybe dark blue or black. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Halloran's pulse quickened. This was new information. It had never come up in the original investigation. He asked more questions. Had the man seen anyone with the truck? No. Had he seen the truck leave? No. He'd gone back inside after his cigarette and hadn't looked out again. Halloran thanked him and continued his canvassing. He spoke with a woman who'd lived in an apartment building that overlooked the Eastgate's parking lot in 2003. She'd since moved, but had returned to the area and was living just a few streets over. Did she remember anything from that night? She'd been in her 20s then, a single mother with a young daughter. She'd been home that night, her apartment on the 2nd floor. She'd occasionally looked out the window, checking on her car in the parking lot below. She thought she might have seen a truck behind the Eastgate that night, but she couldn't be certain. So many years had passed. A truck. 2 separate witnesses, neither of whom had been interviewed in 2003, both mentioning a truck parked near the back door of the Eastgate lounge on the night Rita disappeared. Halloran returned to the case file and reviewed every vehicle registration for every person interviewed during the original investigation. None of the regular customers owned trucks. Travis Mackenzie drove a sedan. Dennis Coelho drove a minivan. Halloran expanded his search. Were there any employees or former employees who owned trucks? He pulled employment records from the Eastgate. In 2003, the bar had employed 8 people, 1 manager, 5 bartenders including Rita, and 2 cooks. Halloran cross-referenced their names with vehicle registrations from that time period. One name jumped out: Leonard "Lenny" Bivens, 42 years old in 2003, one of the cooks at the Eastgate lounge. Bivens had worked at the bar for about 18 months, from late 2001 until June 2003, 3 months after Rita disappeared. Halloran pulled up Bivens' vehicle registration from 2003. He owned a 1989 Ford F-150 pickup truck, color dark blue. Halloran felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a potential breakthrough. He dug deeper into Bivens' background. Leonard Bivens had been born in Butte, Montana in 1961. He'd worked a series of restaurant jobs throughout his adult life: line cook, dishwasher, prep cook. He'd never been married. His criminal record showed minor offenses: a DUI in 1995, disorderly conduct in 1998, shoplifting in 2000. Nothing violent, nothing that would have raised red flags during the original investigation. In fact, Halloran discovered that Bivens had been interviewed by Detective Winters in March 2003, just days after Rita's disappearance. In his statement, Bivens said he'd finished his shift at the Eastgate at 9 p.m. on March 15th and had gone home. He lived alone in a rental house on the north side of Missoula. He'd said he didn't know Rita well. They worked different areas of the bar, rarely interacted beyond basic work communication. He had no explanation for what might have happened to her. But why had Bivens left his job at the Eastgate just 3 months after Rita's disappearance? Halloran called Dennis Coelho, who still owned the bar and was now in his late 60s. Did Dennis remember Lenny Bivens? Oh yes, Dennis said. Lenny had been an adequate cook. Nothing spectacular. He'd been quiet, kept to himself mostly. Dennis had let him go in June because business was slow and he'd needed to cut costs. Lenny hadn't seemed upset about it. Had there been any problems with Lenny? Dennis thought for a moment. Well, now that you mention it, Dennis said. Rita had once complained that Lenny made her uncomfortable. Nothing specific, just a feeling. He'd stare at her sometimes, watch her while she worked. Dennis had spoken to Lenny about it, told him to focus on his own work. Lenny had apologized, said he didn't mean anything by it. The issue had seemed to resolve itself. Dennis had never thought about it again, until now. Halloran ran a comprehensive background check on Leonard Bivens. After leaving the Eastgate in 2003, Bivens had moved around Montana, working kitchen jobs in Butte, Helena, Great Falls, and Kalispell. In 2008, he'd been arrested in Great Falls for assault. He'd gotten into a fight with a woman he'd been dating, grabbing her by the arm during an argument and leaving bruises. She'd pressed charges. He'd pled guilty to misdemeanor assault and served 6 months in county jail. In 2012, he'd been arrested again, this time for stalking. A woman he'd worked with at a restaurant in Kalispell reported that Bivens had been following her, showing up at places she frequented, leaving notes on her car. He'd been charged, pled no contest, and received a restraining order. In 2015, another assault charge. This time he'd pushed a girlfriend during an argument, and she'd hit her head on a table. The charge was reduced to disorderly conduct, and he'd paid a fine. A pattern was emerging. Bivens had issues with women. He'd become fixated on women, made them uncomfortable, crossed boundaries. And this was just what had been reported, just what had resulted in charges. How many other women had he made uncomfortable? How many had chosen not to report? Halloran felt the familiar weight of certainty settling in his chest. Bivens had been there the night Rita disappeared. He'd had access to the bar, knew the layout, knew the closing routine. He'd owned a truck that witnesses placed at the scene. He'd shown inappropriate interest in Rita, and he'd left his job just 3 months after she'd vanished. This wasn't proof, but it was enough to dig deeper. Halloran discovered that Leonard Bivens was currently living in Missoula. He'd returned to the city in 2018 and was working as a dishwasher at a steakhouse on Reserve Street. He was 61 years old now, nearly 2 decades older than when Rita had disappeared. Halloran drove by Bivens' current residence, a small duplex on the west side of town. A dark blue Ford F-150 sat in the driveway. Not the same truck from 2003, but the same make and color. Some habits die hard. Halloran began surveillance, documenting Bivens' movements, his routine. Bivens lived alone. He drove to work, came home, occasionally stopped at a convenience store for cigarettes and lottery tickets. He seemed to have no social life, no friends, no relationships. Halloran watched him for 2 weeks before making his next move. While maintaining surveillance, Halloran worked on building a legal case. He needed probable cause for a search warrant, needed enough evidence to justify the intrusion. The witnesses who'd seen the truck were helpful, but their memories were 16 years old and not entirely specific. Bivens' later arrests for assault and stalking established a pattern of behavior, but weren't direct evidence of involvement in Rita's disappearance. Halloran needed more. He returned to the physical evidence from the original investigation. In the evidence room, he found the items that had been collected from the Eastgate Lounge in March 2003. Swabs taken from door handles, the back door frame, the bar surface. In 2003, DNA technology existed, but was less sophisticated, less comprehensive. Many of the swabs had been tested for fingerprints, but not for DNA. Halloran requested that the swabs be reprocessed using modern DNA analysis techniques. The results came back in December 2019. The swabs from the back door handle contained a mixture of DNA profiles. One profile matched Rita May's. Her DNA was on file from samples taken during the original investigation. But there was a second profile, a male contributor. The lab tech extracted the profile and ran it through the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, the National DNA Database. There was a hit. The DNA matched Leonard Bivens, whose DNA had been entered into the system following his 2008 assault conviction. Bivens' DNA was on the back door handle of the Eastgate Lounge. Halloran felt the case solidifying. Bivens had been at the bar that night. That was already established. But his DNA on the back door handle suggested he'd touched it, possibly recently, possibly around the time Rita was closing up. Still, it wasn't conclusive. Bivens had worked there. He could argue he'd touched the door during his shift earlier that evening. Halloran needed to place Bivens at the scene after 9 p.m., after he'd claimed to have left. He returned to the witness interviews, looking for anyone who might have seen Bivens after his shift ended. He found a statement from a dishwasher who'd worked with Bivens that night. The dishwasher, a college student named Ryan Porter, had said Bivens left through the back door around 9:15 p.m. Halloran tracked down Ryan Porter, now 39 years old and living in Seattle. Did Porter remember Lenny Bivens? Sort of, Porter said. Did he remember the night Rita Mays disappeared? Vaguely, it had been a long time ago. Halloran asked Porter to think carefully. On the night of March 15, 2003, had Bivens actually left at 9:15, or was that just what Bivens had claimed? Porter thought hard, reaching through the years. Actually, Porter said slowly. Now that he was thinking about it, he wasn't sure Bivens had left when he said he did. The kitchen had been busy that night. Lots of last-minute orders because of a college basketball game on TV. Porter had been focused on dishes. Hadn't really noticed when Bivens left. He'd just assumed Bivens left when he always left. Halloran went back through the original security footage with new eyes. The camera inside the bar didn't cover the kitchen area, but it did capture glimpses of the hallway that led to the back. At 9:12 p.m., the footage showed Bivens walking through the frame, heading toward the back. He was wearing a white kitchen uniform and a dark jacket. The assumption had always been that he'd left the building at that point. But what if he hadn't? What if he'd gone outside briefly but then come back? Or what if he'd waited in his truck, parked behind the building, watching? The camera showed Rita closing up, moving through her routine. At 11:51 p.m., she walked toward the back, disappearing from view. What had happened in those moments outside the camera's range? Halloran drafted a search warrant affidavit. He outlined the circumstantial evidence: Bivens' presence at the bar that night, his truck potentially at the scene, his DNA on the back door handle, his history of concerning behavior toward women, his sudden departure from the job 3 months after Rita's disappearance. He submitted the affidavit to a judge. On January 8, 2020, the warrant was approved. Halloran assembled a team: 4 officers, evidence technicians, a crime scene specialist. They would execute the warrant at 6:00 a.m. the next morning, catching Bivens at home before he left for work. January 9, 2020 dawned cold and clear in Missoula. At exactly 6:01 a.m., Halloran and his team knocked on the door of Leonard Bivens' duplex. It took 3 rounds of knocking before Bivens answered, bleary-eyed, wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. Halloran identified himself and presented the search warrant. Bivens' eyes widened, his face going pale. "What's this about?" he asked. "We're investigating the disappearance of Rita Mays in March 2003, Halloran said. "We need to search your residence." Bivens stepped back, allowing the officers inside. "I already talked to the police about that years ago," he said. "I didn't have anything to do with it." The search took 7 hours. Evidence technicians moved through every room, photographing, documenting, collecting. They focused on items that might have been stored for nearly 17 years. Boxes in the basement, items in the attic, old clothing, old tools. In a cluttered storage area in the basement, they found a metal trunk filled with miscellaneous items: old magazines, tools, some dishes, random electronics. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, they found something that made everyone in the room stop. It was a woman's purse, brown leather worn soft, the strap still intact. The detective lifted it carefully, opened it. Inside was a wallet. He pulled out the driver's license. The photograph showed a young woman with auburn hair and green eyes. Name: Rita Lynn Mays. Date of birth: June 7, 1976. Expiration date: June 7, 2006. The license had expired 14 years ago. Rita had never lived to renew it. The discovery rippled through the room like an electric shock. The purse was Rita's. Her wallet, her identification, her personal belongings. Everything she'd had with her the night she disappeared. And it was here, in Leonard Bivens's basement, hidden in a trunk beneath other items. Halloran felt his hands shaking slightly as he bagged the evidence. This was it. This was the proof they needed. There was no innocent explanation for why Bivens would have Rita's purse. He'd taken it from her. Which meant he'd been with her when she disappeared. Which meant he knew what had happened to her. Which meant, in all likelihood, he'd killed her. Upstairs, Halloran found Bivens sitting at his kitchen table, watched by 2 officers. "Leonard," Halloran said quietly, "we need to talk." Bivens looked up, his eyes darting to the evidence bag Halloran was carrying. He could see the brown leather purse inside the clear plastic. The color drained from his face. "I want a lawyer," Bivens said. "That's your right," Halloran replied. "But I think you should know we found Rita Mays' purse in your basement. Her wallet, her ID, everything. So before you lawyer up, you might want to think about whether you want to tell us what happened. Because right now, this looks really bad for you." Bivens stared at the table. His hands, clasped together, were shaking. For a long moment, he said nothing. Halloran waited. He'd learned patience over the years, learned that silence could be more powerful than questions. Let the suspect sit with it. Let them feel the weight of the evidence. Let them understand that the game was over. Finally, Bivens looked up. "Can I have some coffee?" he asked. Halloran nodded to one of the officers, who went to make coffee. More silence. Then, so quietly that Halloran almost didn't hear it, Bivens spoke. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Halloran read Bivens his Miranda rights carefully, methodically. Bivens waived his right to an attorney and agreed to speak with Halloran. They sat in Bivens' kitchen while a recording device documented every word. "Tell me what happened," Halloran said. Bivens took a shaky breath. "I liked her," he said. "Rita. I liked watching her work. She was pretty. She was nice to people. I wanted to talk to her, but I didn't know how. I wasn't good at talking to women." "Did you stay at the bar after your shift ended on March 15th? Halloran asked. Bivens nodded. "I left through the back door, but I didn't go home. I waited in my truck. I don't know why. I just wanted to see her. I knew she was closing that night. I thought maybe I could offer to walk her to her car. Maybe we could talk." Halloran kept his voice neutral. "What happened?" Bivens rubbed his face. "I waited in my truck for a long time. It was snowing. Finally, around midnight, the back door opened and she came out. She had her purse and her keys. I got out of my truck and called to her. She looked surprised to see me. I said I'd been working late and asked if she wanted some company walking to her car. She said no thanks. Her car was right there." "Then what?" Bivens' voice dropped lower. "I told her I'd always thought she was pretty, that I liked her. She got this look on her face, not scared exactly, but uncomfortable. She said thank you, but she had a boyfriend. She started to walk toward her car. I followed her. I said we could just talk, just be friends. She said she was tired and wanted to go home. She opened her car door. I grabbed her arm. I just wanted her to listen to me. She pulled away and told me to let go. She said she was going to tell Dennis about this. I panicked." Halloran leaned forward. "What did you do, Leonard?" Bivens closed his eyes. "I grabbed her purse. I don't know why. I just grabbed it and pulled, trying to stop her from leaving. She fought back, yelling at me to let go. We struggled. She slipped on the ice and fell. Hit her head on the parking lot pavement. I heard it. This awful sound. She stopped moving." The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet whir of the recording device. Halloran waited. Bivens opened his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted to talk to her. But she hit her head and she wasn't moving and I panicked. I checked for a pulse but I couldn't find one. I didn't know what to do. I knew if I called 911, they'd think I killed her on purpose. They'd think I was some kind of monster. So I put her in my truck. Where did you take her? Bivens wiped his eyes. There's a place up in the National Forest, off Highway 200. A logging road I used to go to when I was younger. It's remote. No one goes there in winter. I drove there with her in my truck. It took about 45 minutes. I buried her. I used a shovel I had in the truck. The ground was frozen, but there was a spot where the ground was softer, like maybe animals had been digging there. It took me hours. It was still dark when I finished. I drove home. I couldn't believe what I'd done. Halloran felt a wave of sadness and anger. All these years, Barbara Mays had been waiting for answers. All these years, Rita had been alone in the forest, her family not knowing where she was, unable to grieve properly. What did you do with Rita's belongings? Bivens gestured vaguely toward the basement. Her purse was in my truck. I meant to get rid of it, but I was scared. I thought if someone found it, it would lead back to me. So I hid it. I put it in that trunk and tried to forget about it. I kept moving around, different cities, different jobs. I thought maybe if I left Missoula, people would forget. I thought I'd gotten away with it. Halloran stood up. Leonard Bivens, you're under arrest for the murder of Rita Mays. He motioned to the officers, who placed handcuffs on Bivens, as they led him out to the patrol car. Bivens was crying, mumbling apologies to no one in particular. Halloran stayed behind for a moment, standing in the cold January morning, thinking about Rita, about how a simple act of rejection, a woman's right to say no, had cost her everything, about how one man's entitlement, his inability to accept rejection, had ended a life and shattered a family, about how Rita had been just 26 years old, working a closing shift, trying to make her way in the world, when Leonard Bivens decided that his desire to talk to her was more important than her autonomy, her safety, her life. The news of the arrest spread through Missoula like wildfire. By noon, every media outlet in Montana was running the story. Arrest made in Rita Mays' cold case. Halloran held a press conference that afternoon. He stood at a podium flanked by the Missoula Chief of Police and the county attorney, and outlined the basics of the case. A suspect was in custody. Charges were being filed. Remains had not yet been recovered, but they had a location to search based on the suspect's statement. Halloran thanked the public for their patience and their tips over the years. He especially thanked Barbara Mays, who'd never given up hope, who'd kept Rita's case alive through sheer force of will. Barbara Mays sat in her living room in Great Falls, watching the press conference on television. Michael was with her, his arm around her shoulders. Sarah was on the phone, having called as soon as she heard the news. Barbara wept. Not tears of joy exactly, but tears of relief, of validation, of exhaustion. For 17 years she'd been told that Rita was probably dead, that she needed to accept it, that she needed to move on. She'd refused. She'd insisted that someone out there knew what had happened. And she'd been right. Someone had known. Leonard Bivens had known. And now, finally, the truth was coming to light. But the truth was a double-edged sword. Rita was gone. She'd been gone this entire time, buried in a forest, alone. They'd never get her back. They'd never hear her voice again, never see her smile. The closure Barbara had longed for felt hollow in the face of that permanent loss. On January 14, 2020, Halloran led a team of investigators and forensic specialists to the area described by Leonard Bivens. Highway 200 stretched north from Missoula into the vast expanse of the Lolo National Forest, about 30 miles from the city. They turned onto a logging road, barely visible from the highway. The road was overgrown, used only occasionally by hunters or forest workers. Snow covered the ground, and the trees stood silent and ancient around them. Following Bivens' directions, they hiked nearly a mile into the forest until they reached a small clearing. Bivens had described a particular tree with a split trunk, a landmark he'd remembered from that terrible night 17 years ago. They found the tree. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, they identified an area of disturbed soil. The excavation began. It took 2 days of careful work in the freezing January cold. The team worked slowly, methodically, documenting every layer of soil, every scrap of fabric or bone they uncovered. On the afternoon of January the 16th, they found her. The skeletal remains were remarkably well preserved, protected by the cold Montana winters and the remote location. She'd been buried in a shallow grave, covered with dirt and pine needles and branches. Near the remains, they found scraps of clothing, black fabric that had once been jeans and a t-shirt, white sneakers that had somehow survived relatively intact. They found a silver ring on one of the finger bones, a simple band that had belonged to her grandmother. They carefully, reverently, gathered every bone, every piece of evidence, placing Rita Mays into a body bag for the final time. She was going home. The forensic anthropologist confirmed what everyone already knew. The remains were those of a female, aged mid-20s, approximately 5'6". Dental records matched Rita Mays conclusively. The skull showed evidence of blunt force trauma consistent with a fall onto a hard surface. The cause of death was determined to be head injury with subsequent brain hemorrhage. Rita had likely died within minutes of hitting her head on the parking lot pavement, never regaining consciousness. It was small comfort to her family, but at least she hadn't suffered for long. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide. Leonard Bivens was formally charged with deliberate homicide, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. Montana law didn't have a statute of limitations on murder. It didn't matter that 17 years had passed. Bivens would face justice. His arraignment took place on January 20th, 2020. He appeared before the judge via video link from the county jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his eyes downcast. The judge read the charges. Bivens' public defender entered a plea of not guilty, though everyone in the courtroom knew how hollow that plea was. Bivens had confessed. His DNA was on Rita's purse, on the back door. He'd led police to her body. The evidence was overwhelming. The months leading up to trial were a blur of motions and hearings. Bivens' defense attorney argued that his client's confession should be suppressed, that he'd been coerced, that he hadn't been properly Mirandized. The judge reviewed the video of the interview and ruled against the defense. Bivens had been clearly advised of his rights and had voluntarily waived them. The confession would stand. The defense then floated the possibility of a plea deal, manslaughter instead of deliberate homicide, arguing that Bivens hadn't intended to kill Rita, that her death had been accidental. The county attorney rejected the offer. This was murder. Rita had died because Bivens couldn't accept rejection, because he'd forcibly detained her, because he'd created the situation that led to her death. That was deliberate homicide under Montana law. The trial began in September 2020, delayed slightly by the COVID-19 pandemic, but ultimately moving forward. The Missoula County Courthouse implemented safety protocols, masks, distanced seating, limited gallery attendance. Barbara Mays attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row with Michael and Sarah beside her. She listened to the prosecution lay out the evidence piece by piece. Security footage showing Rita's last movements. Witness testimony about the truck parked behind the east gate. DNA evidence linking Bivens to the scene. The purse found in his basement. His full confession played for the jury. Photographs of the burial site, of the remains, of the items found with Rita. Expert testimony from the medical examiner explaining the cause of death. Character witnesses describing Bivens' history of making women uncomfortable, of crossing boundaries, of violence. The defense had little to work with. Their strategy was to paint Bivens as a lonely, socially awkward man who'd made a terrible mistake but who wasn't a cold-blooded killer. They emphasized that he hadn't planned to hurt Rita, that her death had been accidental, that he'd panicked and made bad decisions but hadn't acted with malice. The prosecution countered that intent could be inferred from actions. Bivens had grabbed Rita, restrained her against her will, created a dangerous situation. When she'd fallen and hit her head, instead of calling for help, he'd checked to see if she was dead, and then disposed of her body to avoid consequences. He'd hidden her purse for 17 years. He'd never come forward. He'd let her family suffer in uncertainty. Those weren't the actions of someone who'd made an innocent mistake. Those were the actions of someone who knew he'd committed murder and was trying to get away with it. The most powerful moment of the trial came during victim impact statements. The judge allowed Barbara Mays to speak before sentencing. Barbara stood at the podium, her hands gripping the wood to keep them from shaking. She looked directly at Leonard Bivens, who sat at the defense table, unable to meet her gaze. "You took my daughter from me," Barbara said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "You took her future, her dreams, her chance to have a family of her own. You took her from her brother and sister, from her boyfriend, from her friends. You took her because she said no to you, because she had the audacity to reject you and walk away." Barbara continued, her words measured and devastating. "For 17 years, I didn't know if she was alive or dead. For 17 years, I hoped she might come home. For 17 years, I celebrated her birthday without her, spent Christmas wondering where she was, woke up every morning, not knowing if this would be the day I got answers. You knew where she was. You knew she was dead. You knew she was alone in that forest. And you said nothing. You moved on with your life while mine stopped on March 15th, 2003. She paused, gathering herself. Rita was 26 years old. She was funny and kind. She loved hiking and reading. She called me every Sunday. She was saving money to go back to school. She wanted to be a teacher. She had so much life ahead of her. And you took it all away because she rejected you. Because your ego couldn't handle a woman saying no. I hope you think about that every day for the rest of your life. I hope you see her face every time you close your eyes. I hope you never know a moment of peace." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of muffled crying. Michael stood next and spoke about losing his little sister, about the years of not knowing, about the anger and helplessness that had defined his life since 2003. Sarah spoke about growing up without her older sister, about missing the guidance and friendship that Rita would have provided. Friends from the Eastgate Lounge spoke about Rita's warmth, her humor, the hole her absence had left in their community. Travis McKenzie, Rita's boyfriend, now married with children, spoke about the what-ifs, the life they'd never gotten to build together, the love that had been stolen before it had a chance to fully bloom. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts: deliberate homicide, kidnapping, tampering with evidence. Bivens showed no reaction, staring straight ahead as the verdicts were read. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. Montana law prescribed a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for deliberate homicide. The judge imposed this sentence, along with additional consecutive sentences for the other charges. Leonard Bivens, now 61 years old, would spend the rest of his life in the Montana State Prison in Deer Lodge. He would never be eligible for parole. He would die in prison. As the bailiff led Bivens away in handcuffs, he turned briefly to look at the Mays family. For just a moment, his eyes met Barbara's. She held his gaze, unflinching. She wanted him to see her, to understand that she'd won, that Rita had won. He'd taken Rita's life, but he hadn't managed to erase her, to make her disappear completely. Rita was remembered. Rita was loved. Rita's story had been told, and Leonard Bivens would be remembered only as the man who killed her, who stole her future, who couldn't accept rejection. His legacy was nothing but shame. In the months following the trial, the Mays family began the long process of healing. They held a funeral for Rita, finally able to lay her to rest properly. More than 300 people attended. Friends, community members, investigators who'd worked on the case, strangers who'd followed the story and felt moved by Rita's tragedy and by Barbara's perseverance. Rita was buried in a cemetery in Great Falls, beneath a simple headstone bearing her name, her dates, and the words, "Beloved daughter and sister." Barbara visited the grave regularly, bringing flowers, sitting beside the headstone, talking to Rita about everything that had happened, about the justice that had finally been served. Barbara also turned her attention to advocacy. She worked with legislators to improve protocols for cold case investigations, to ensure that evidence was properly preserved and periodically reviewed using new technology. She partnered with families of other missing persons, offering support and solidarity, sharing the lessons she'd learned about persistence and hope. She created a scholarship fund in Rita's name for young women from Montana who wanted to pursue careers in teaching or education, honoring the dream Rita had never gotten to fulfill. She gave interviews to local media, talking about the importance of never giving up, of continuing to push for answers even when cases seemed hopeless. Detective James Halloran was promoted to sergeant and continued working cold cases. He'd solved Rita's case, but there were so many others still waiting for answers. He thought often about the random chance that had led to the breakthrough, his decision to recanvass the neighborhood, the witnesses who happened to remember a truck after all those years, the DNA technology that had advanced enough to extract usable profiles from old evidence. He thought about how easily Bivens could have gotten away with it if just one or two things had been different. It reinforced his commitment to the work, to the belief that every case deserved attention, that every victim deserved justice, no matter how much time had passed. The Eastgate Lounge, which had carried Rita's memorial plaque for nearly 2 decades, updated it after her remains were found. The new plaque included her dates of birth and death, now certain, and added a line: "Justice served, 2020." Dennis Coelho, now semi-retired, often thought about Rita, about the young woman who'd worked for him, who'd been reliable and kind, who'd died in his parking lot on a snowy March night. He thought about how he'd trusted Lenny Bivens, how he'd hired him, worked alongside him, never suspected that the quiet cook was capable of violence. He thought about Rita's complaint that Bivens made her uncomfortable and wished he'd taken it more seriously, wished he'd fired Bivens right then instead of just talking to him. He carried guilt for that, even though everyone told him it wasn't his fault. The case attracted national attention. True crime documentaries, podcasts, and news programs featured Rita's story. Some focused on the investigation, praising Halloran's detective work. Others examined the broader issue of male violence against women, using Rita's case as an example of what happens when men feel entitled to women's attention, when rejection is met with violence. Rita's story became part of conversations about safety, about the subtle and overt ways that women navigate danger, about the men who can't accept no for an answer. It wasn't how Rita would have wanted to be remembered, as a victim, as a cautionary tale. But perhaps some good could come from it. Perhaps other women might be spared similar fates. Perhaps other men might recognize concerning patterns in their own behavior and choose different paths. Sarah Mays, Rita's younger sister, became a victim's advocate, working with law enforcement to support families of missing persons and homicide victims. She channeled her grief into purpose, using the experience of losing Rita and waiting for answers as a foundation for helping others navigate similar traumas. Michael stayed in Billings, working in construction, but he volunteered with search and rescue teams, helping to look for missing people in the mountains and wilderness areas of Montana. He couldn't save Rita, but he could help bring others home. Barbara continued to live in Great Falls, Rita's childhood bedroom still mostly unchanged, a shrine to the daughter she'd lost. But now, there was closure. Now, there was a grave to visit. Now, there were answers to the questions that had haunted her for 17 years. In the Montana State Prison, Leonard Bivens adjusted to life behind bars. He kept to himself, worked in the prison laundry, spent his evenings in his cell. Other inmates knew what he'd done. In prison, men who killed women, especially in circumstances involving rejection or stalking, were not respected. Bivens had to be careful, had to watch his back. He'd filed an appeal of his conviction, a formality that everyone knew would go nowhere. The evidence was too strong. The confession was too clear. He would die in prison, exactly as the judge had sentenced him. Sometimes, in the quiet of his cell, he thought about Rita, about how different his life might have been if he'd just driven home that night, if he'd accepted her rejection and moved on. But those thoughts were useless. He'd made his choices. Rita had paid the price. And now, finally, so was he. The years passed. 2021, 2022, 2023. Barbara Mays grew older. Michael's children, Rita's nieces and nephews who'd never met their aunt, grew up hearing stories about her, learning about the importance of family, of memory, of justice. Sarah got married, started her own family, named her first daughter Rita. Life continued, as it always does, marked now not by Rita's absence, but by her remembered presence. On March 15th each year, the anniversary of her disappearance, Barbara visited Rita's grave. She brought fresh flowers, daisies, Rita's favorite. She sat beside the headstone and told Rita about the year that had passed, about the family, about the work being done in her name, about the people who still remembered her. The case, once cold, was now closed. The file was archived, the evidence stored, the loose ends tied up. But Rita's impact continued to ripple outward. The scholarship fund sent 3 young women to college each year. The protocols implemented after the case helped solve 2 other cold cases in Montana. The documentary about Rita's story reached millions of viewers, sparking conversations, changing perspectives, inspiring people to never give up on finding the truth. Detective Halloran used the case in training sessions for new investigators, teaching them about persistence, about new technology, about the importance of re-examining old evidence with fresh eyes. Rita had become more than just a victim. She'd become a catalyst for change, a symbol of what could be accomplished when families refused to give up and when investigators stayed committed to finding answers. In the end, Rita Mays' story was one of tragedy, yes, but also of hope. Tragedy because a young woman with her whole life ahead of her was killed by a man who couldn't accept rejection. Hope because even after 17 years, even when the case had gone cold and most people had moved on, the truth had emerged. Justice had been served. Rita had been found. She'd been brought home. Her family had gotten answers. Her killer had been held accountable. In a world where so many cases remain unsolved, where so many families never get closure, where so many victims are forgotten, Rita's case stood as proof that persistence matters, that families who refuse to give up can make a difference, that detectives who bring fresh eyes to old evidence can find answers, that even years later, even decades later, justice is still possible. The mountains around Missoula still stand, ancient and unchanging. The snow still falls in March, thick and heavy, muffling the world in white. The Eastgate Lounge still serves drinks, still employs bartenders who close late on Friday nights. But they're safer now. Security cameras cover the parking lot. Employees are encouraged to walk out together. Dennis Coelho made sure of that. Rita's death changed the place, made everyone more aware, more cautious. Her memorial plaque remains on the wall, a reminder to everyone who sees it that she was here, that she mattered, that she's remembered. And in a cemetery in Great Falls, beneath a simple headstone, Rita Mays rests. She's not alone. Her family visits regularly. Her memory lives on through the scholarship fund, through the advocacy work done in her name, through the stories told about her kindness and her dreams. She didn't get to live the life she'd planned. She didn't get to become a teacher, didn't get to have children, didn't get to grow old. But she's not forgotten. And in the end, perhaps that's the greatest victory against those who would make us disappear. To be remembered, to be mourned, to be loved, to have our stories told. Rita Mays was 26 years old. She worked hard. She loved her family. She was kind to strangers. She said no to a man who couldn't accept rejection. And that shouldn't have cost her life. But it did. And now we remember. And now we honor her by continuing to fight for justice, for safety, for a world where women can say no without fear, where rejection isn't met with violence, where every person who goes missing has a family that never stops looking, and investigators who never stop working, and a community that never stops caring. Make sure you subscribe to stay updated on more stories of justice and resolution in cold cases that seemed unsolvable. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this story with someone who believes in the power of persistence, who knows that families deserve answers, who understands that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. What do you think drove Detective Halloran to keep pushing when so many others had moved on? What would you want your family to know if you were in Rita's position? Comment below with your thoughts. Every unsolved case represents a family still waiting for answers, still hoping for the closure that finally came to the Mays family. Your support helps bring attention to these cases, helps keep victims' memories alive, helps remind investigators that these files aren't just numbers, they're people. Thank you for taking the time to learn Rita's story, to honor her memory, and to believe that even after 17 years, the truth can still be found.